In that time of the year where we clean out the sediment of the pond. It is all percolated. Time to get in there. Thankful for the Bobcat. Brother Richard Wharton has donated to allow us to do that. Now, it was bigger equipment that created the pond, but this is just fine for cleaning out the sediment. I like big equipment. I was introduced to a guy years ago, R.G. Letourneau. And of course, he is the big equipment guy. And if you've never studied or looked at his life, I would encourage you to look at his life. He dropped out of school, I think it was right 1901. He went to work for a foundry. And while he was there, he began to learn all kinds of things. So he really wanted to develop the things that were going on in his head. The war started. He was a part of that effort, came back, told his wife, I want to start a business and I want my partner to be God. And he began to build earth-moving equipment. Of course, later on, he builds a lot more than earth-moving equipment. The stuff he does is astounding. He develops a school, but an integral part of his entire work career was using his business as a ministry. It was so amazing. He would preach to his workers on the shop floors. Everywhere he went, he proclaimed Christ. He supported evangelists. He did mission efforts. One of the things that's interesting about him is that instead of giving 10% to the Lord, he gave 90 and he lived on the 10. Amazing, amazing guy. I think a lot of people look at what he's done and thought, man, look at the wealth that he created. I don't think he was quite as interested in that as he was about the wealth he would have in heaven. This morning's devotional, we're talking about Abraham. And when you take a look in Genesis, Abraham was an incredibly wealthy guy. This is why they had to separate he and Lot, because his herds were so huge. This was a guy that had tremendous influence. We know that when Lot got in trouble, his men went and fought another king's men. And so he apparently had an army too. So just an amazing guy. But when you get into the New Testament, you don't really read anything about his wealth at all. You read about his faith. And I think that when you look at Letourneau's life, it's the same thing, is that the further on he goes, the more it's about the Lord and less it is about the finances. So in Hebrews chapter 11, starts in verse 8, it says, by faith Abraham, he was called to go out of a place which he should after receive for inheritance, obeyed and went out, knowing not whither he went. And so it talks about how by faith he sojourned. Verse 10, for he looked for a city whose foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And then we see again, he's repeated. It's amazing. Here's this chapter of faith. He's repeated again in verse 17. By faith, Abraham, when he was tried, offered up Isaac, that he received the promise, offered up his only begotten son. Now it says in verse 19, and he believed that God could raise him up again, and he realized he was a like figure. And so this was a guy that left his country by faith. This was a guy that was willing to sacrifice his son by faith. I know that sounds incredibly crazy, but that's what the pagan gods would require of that time. And so it seemed kind of normal, but God didn't require that. God was going to offer his son, and that was just a picture. We see in the scriptures in several locations. One is in Romans 4, verse 3, it says, for what saith the scriptures, Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him for righteousness. We see the same language in Galatians 3:6. Even Abraham believed God and was counted him for righteousness. And so Abraham was a saved child of God as he looked forward to the sacrifice of Jesus Christ. What he was willing to do with his son, he knew that God was going to do, that his sins might be forgiven. Absolutely amazing. Here you have this very wealthy man that could have been self-absorbed. He could have been power hungry, and he wasn't. He was an individual that loved God. He was an individual that was characterized by his faith. Letourneau was the same. Question is, are we the same? Do we see our station where we are now in life, a station to where we can really use it as a ministry for God? Letourneau did. Letourneau was told by his pastor early on, when he was confused about doing God's work, he said, you don't have to be a missionary or a preacher. God needs businessmen as well. And Letourneau believed that he was suited for that kind of work because God created him. And that's amazing. Here's a guy that had a career moving dirt, and he believed that God situated him because he was built of dirt and shaped of God to do a work. Check out the story of Letourneau. Read after Abraham, and let us parallel our lives accordingly. May God richly bless you. You take care.